friends with the couple before he was ready to act. By February 1948, he had found another slaughterhouse, and the Hendersons agreed to go for a weekend to Brighton with their devoted friend, Johnny Haigh. And while there, Dr. Henderson agreed to visit Crawley to see Haigh's factory. He was shot, and Haigh then lured his wife to the storeroom, killed her, and disposed of both bodies in the acid. Once again, he claimed to have drunk his victims' blood before disposing of them. He then forged a series of letters to get control of their property under the pretext that they had gone to South Africa, leaving him as their trustee. Such was his skill that neither their friends nor the banks ever suspected anything, and attempts were still being made to trace the Hendersons in South Africa a year later. Within a year, this money was running out, and Johnny Haigh had picked on his last victim, Mrs. Durand Deacon. Another container of acid was ordered. The news that Haigh had confessed to 4 more murders created a sensation. As the police searched the cellar at Gloucester Road and followed other information which Haigh seemed happy to give them, they found it hard to accept that in each case he claimed to have drunk the blood of his victims. All police efforts to prevent this information leaking out to the press failed. And the news inevitably proved a sensation when Haigh appeared again at Horsham Magistrates' Court to be remanded for trial. People found it hard to believe that the dapper little man who had confessed so willingly to the police was a vampire. Sightseers of all ages struggled for a glimpse. The vampire story, which had so horrified and fascinated the public, had already got one newspaper into trouble. The editor of the Daily Mirror, Sylvester Bolam, insisted on publishing the news that a man had been arrested for these crimes in the same issue as the announcement of Haigh's arrest. This was reckoned to be in contempt of court, since under English law nothing prejudicial to an accused man can be published before his trial, and Bolam was jailed for 3 months and his newspaper fined. He was released only a short time before Haigh went for trial on the 18th of July at Lewes Assizes. Crowds queued overnight outside the courthouse to try to get a seat and packed the street to watch the participants arrive. A coach brought many of the witnesses. The newspapers did a roaring trade, but one person they were unable to find out anything about was Barbara Stevens, who smiled but said nothing about her 6-year friendship with Haigh. Mrs. Constance Lane, whose suspicions had first alerted the police, was a vital prosecution witness. The trial was held before Sir Travers Humphreys, one of the most celebrated criminal judges of the era. Early in his career, he had been one of Oscar Wilde's defense team. As always, Haigh was immaculately dressed and seemed totally unconcerned as he was led into court. The prosecution was led by the Attorney General, Sir Hartley Shawcross. He immediately set out the full details of Haigh's macabre confessions during cross-examination of Detective Inspector Shelley Symes. Symes emphasized Haigh's belief that without a body, murder could not be proved. Dr. Keith Simpson was then called to tell the jury that he had been able to find incontrovertible evidence of the killing of Mrs. Durand Deacon during his examination of the storeroom and the yard outside. Step by step, the jury was told how the unsuspecting widow had been lured to the storeroom and shot. How Haigh had made meticulous preparations for disposing of her body with acid, and how he had carried this out over several days. They heard how he had shown absolutely no remorse and seemed proud of his craftsmanship. Throughout the prosecution case, Haigh sat doing crossword puzzles and showing little interest. At no point did his defending counsel, Maxwell Fyfe, attempt to cross-examine any prosecution witness. He had decided that Haigh's only hope of avoiding the gallows was to be proved insane. When he opened the defense case, he immediately stated, "The disorder of mind which I submit has affected the reason of the accused is that rare but quite well-known type of mental aberration which is called, in psychological medicine, pure paranoia." A leading consultant, Dr. Henry Yellowlees, was called to testify to Haigh's paranoia. He proved unconvincing, several times rattled by questions from the judge. Maxwell Fyfe was unable to repair the bad impression made by his only defense witness. In cross-examination, Hartley Shawcross forced Yellowlees to admit that Haigh must have known he was doing wrong. The judge's summing up was scrupulous in setting out the defense's theory of paranoia, but the jury was unimpressed. On the 19th of July, they took only 13 minutes to find Haigh guilty. He was sentenced to hang for the murder of Mrs. Durand Deacon. In the days before his execution, he again made headlines by asking for a rehearsal so that there should be no problems with his hanging. The request was refused, but at 9 o'clock on the morning of the 10th of August, Haigh was executed without any difficulties. A crowd of several hundred waited outside the gates of Wandsworth Prison to see the official notice of death. Meticulous to the last, Haigh donated his favourite suit and tie to Madame Tussauds, so that his effigy should be as dapper as he always had been in life. It is still on display there today, as a reminder of one of the most cold-blooded and remorseless of British murderers, who was trapped by his own overconfidence and the forensic skill of Scotland Yard.